The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Maynard Bangs presiding. Your eyes for the Honorable Judge Bangs.
Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of The People versus the Delta Force, a 1986 action film about an elite special ops group that is sent in to resolve a crisis involving a terrorist hijacked airplane. What the radical extremists didn't count on? Chuck fucking Norris. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always in this courtroom, films are to be considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, you are representing the prosecution. You may present your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. People of the court, movies are amazing things because they let us escape and express feelings that are hard to convey in real life. We can't destroy a house when we're mad, but we can watch Godzilla do it. We can't be 17th century samurai, but we can certainly watch them. My point is, there's a place for escapism and revisionism in movies. As a matter of fact, a favorite movie of mine, Uncommon Valor, is such a film. A frustrated response to the Vietnam War, wherein we see Gene Hackman bravely save POWs. Today's movie, The Delta Force, is a bridge too far in this model, I am sad to say. While I do believe Norris's intentions were good, which was to express frustration at the American response to the TWA 847 hijacking and terrorism at large, The Delta Force does not honor that vision, and it may even undermine it. Flight 847 had real heroes, a fearless captain, a stewardess that shielded Jewish passengers at great risk to her own life, and of course, Robert Stedham, whose memory I hope I can honor with this case. So we can talk about the 2-hour runtime, the fact that Lee Marvin is too old and it should have been Charlie Bronson. We are going to be a little heavy today, and the weight of this reality will force us to find this movie guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. Appearing on behalf of the defense is Mr. Robin Warder. Robin, please present your opening statement.
Well, I decided to talk about this movie because on my Patreon page, I recently released a special bonus episode for my podcast, The Trail Went Cold, talking about some of my favorite movies that are inspired by true crimes. And this is one of the most unique entries on the list because the first half of this movie is based on a real hijacking, the TWA Flight 847. And it pretty much, even though all the characters are fictional, sticks to the facts of the story very closely. But then the second half kind of becomes a wish fulfillment revenge fantasy because obviously the real TWA hijacking did not have an exciting happy ending. So this pretty much asks the question, what would happen if you got Chuck Norris and Lee Marvin to save the day? And the second half is pretty much the response is wall-to-wall action where these Delta Force commandos kill all the bad terrorists, rescue all the hostages, and have a happy ending. And it's pretty much what movies are made for, the ultimate escapism, where the stuff you see on the news is depressing, but sometimes you don't get a happy ending. But when you go to the movies, you want to see something that'll let you forget about the problems in the world and feel upbeat when you're done. And that's exactly what the Delta Force does.
Very exciting. Both sides are here to talk about escapism. That's what we like to see. Thank you, Mr. Warder. Mr. Schlender, please present your first exhibit.
Thank you, Your Honor. Around when the movie came out, in a Sun Sentinel Times interview, Norris said, quote, "What we're facing here is the fact that our passive approach to terrorism is going to instigate much more terrorism throughout the world. I would have sent the Delta Force in immediately." This was his response to the TWA 847 hijacking. And one could argue that he might have actually been right. Knock-on attacks that involved American citizens and servicemen included, but certainly weren't limited to, the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, the bombing of embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, the USS Cole bombing, and as of this recording, we are less than a week from the 22nd anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. Inarguably, a better response was needed to terrorism. But how to make that point? How should he write a nuanced policy paper? No, not at all. Instead, we get the tantrum that is the Delta Force. This movie came out less than a year after the tragic events. Imagine, we are so closely removed from the disastrous Afghanistan war withdrawal. Should there be a movie with Vin Diesel driving into Kabul to save the day? The real events of TWA 847 were horrifying, and this movie chose to invoke them and rewrite the ending in a fit of catharsis. So what we lose from this is the understanding of the actual cost of barbaric terrorism. We lose the real heroes. Robert Stedham was beaten and murdered. He was a hero. He took punishment and made the ultimate sacrifice, and who knows how many hostages that saved. It wasn't Uzi Fire from Chuck that did that. Captain John L. I'm going to unfortunately get his last name wrong.
That'll be embarrassing.
Tesseract. Yes. Tesseract was not a meek man. He kept his cool and kept the hijackers placated. This wasn't a rocket from Chuck Norris's motorcycle that did that. And Uli Dickerson, a stewardess who at great risk hid Jewish passports from these butchers. Keep in mind, in the movie, she is shown as complying and pulling out these passports, offering up Joey Bishop to the slaughter. But in real life, this real hero at great personal risk to herself hid those passports. That wasn't a combat knife from Chuck Norris that did that.
Mr. Ward, I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to some of these points about the differences in the reality and what we see in this film.
Well, to provide some more backstory, the Delta Force was made by the Cannon Group, who were pretty much responsible for delivering a lot of B-grade action movies during the 1980s, many of them starring Chuck Norris and Charles Bronson. And as we mentioned earlier, the Lee Marvin role wasn't intended to go to Charles Bronson, but it turned out there was a scheduling conflict and he couldn't do it. But this seems to be a lot more ambitious than your average Cannon film from the 1980s because the writer-producers Menahem Golem and Yoram Gobles, they're both Israeli and they're from Palestine, both of them. And I think they had a lot of personal feelings about the actual TWA hijacking because it took place in June of 1985, and the movie itself came out in February of 1986. So that's a very quick turnaround time to make a movie based on a true event. But you can tell that they had their passion in it because I remember when I watched this for the first time, I just thought it was going to be your standard B-grade action movie, pure escapism. But the first half of the movie is really intense because you have these Palestinian terrorists taking over an airplane, these two hijackers. And it's kind of weird. It has an all-star cast. It's almost like a 1970s disaster movie because you have Jewish couples played by Martin Balsam and Shelley Winters and Lainey Kazam and Joey Bishop. And you have George Kennedy, fresh off the Airport movies from the 1970s, playing a Catholic priest. And there really isn't a lot of action in the first half. It's a really tense and really disturbing hijacking drama because there's a scene where they want to separate all the Jewish passengers with Israeli names, and they ask the stewardess to try to separate the Jewish passports and pick out the Jewish names so that they'll be segregated and taken off the plane. And there's a really long, tense scene where they call up the Jewish passengers to the first class cabin, and their families are really sad and upset about it. And it pretty much plays that way until the second half until it turns into an action film. But you get the sense that Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus, because they are both from Palestine, they know a lot about the Palestine-Israeli conflict, have kind of a passionate feeling about this subject matter, and they try to kind of rise this above your standard action film.
So I would say to that the, now that we got kind of some of the heavy stuff, the real stuff out of the way, And also, I would like to point out that there are ways you can make movies like this work. I would point to United 93, directed by Paul Greengrass. That did a great job of showing the brave men and women on that flight, on the 9/11 attacks, and they weren't saved by a well-coiffed muscle man. That was real, and that was a good drama. So let's talk about the initial hijacking, because I'm inclined to agree with Robin. It's not bad. Robert Forster does a great job in his terrorist role as Abdul. I could easily throw out he's not really of Middle Eastern descent, and you know what? Good. I hope it offends those terrorist bastards, right? So point to the Delta Force there. So, and we actually
a list of demands. We don't want Robert Forster playing any more Middle Eastern actors.
I know. And let's face it, we were all waiting for George Kennedy to reveal he was an undercover cop, not a real priest. Obviously, that didn't happen, though. So those were generally good performances, again, by Joey Bishop, like you said, those great actors. But what's this movie called? It's called The Delta Force. And those performances are so profoundly undercut by the hamming it up of the hitherto now known as the Delta Bros that it causes a clash of tones not dissimilar to the clash that we discussed in Hudson Hawk, or even more recently in The Living Daylights, both guilty movies, mind you. So we can understand the intention about invoking these strong feelings of these real-life events, but it turns into this shoot-'em-up revenge fantasy, and it undercuts that emotional weight. It tries to replace it with catharsis, but there's just too much of a gap there because these wounds are still too fresh in our collective psyche.
Mr. Warder, is the film taking too much poetic license and leaving a better story on the floor?
Well, that's kind of the problem, is it never advertises itself as being based on a true story. It's almost like a Law and Order episode where it's like ripped from the headlines and making a movie based on real events. And I could agree with that, except that the real life story at the time this was filmed didn't really have an ending, because they quietly released a lot of the hostages, but at the time this was filmed, the terrorists had gotten away with it. And one of them was eventually caught and charged with murder, but I don't believe it happened until about a year after the film came out. So you release a straightforward adaptation of this story, where are you going to go? You don't really have an ending. So I guess that's why they wanted to combine these two things, like the terrorist drama, the hostage drama, with a action film, and pretty much show the ending, which America really wanted. And what's kind of interesting is that they also tie it in with like another real life event known as Operation Eagle Claw, which was a failed operation from the Delta Force to rescue a bunch of the hostages in Iran in 1980. And they pretty much just stick Chuck Norris and Lee Marvin in the middle of it because the mission fails, which it did in real life, and they're expressing their frustration. So Chuck Norris decides to retire, but once he finds out about all this this hijacking, he decides to come out of retirement in his trusty Dodge Charger truck and join them at the last minute. So it's pretty much giving the audience what they want to see, which is like Chuck Norris kicking ass and Lee Marvin kicking ass. And Dylan just praised the performance of Robert Forster as the lead terrorist Abdul, and I definitely agree with that even though he's not a Middle Eastern actor, he does an excellent job of disappearing onto the role. He gives like a lot of his dialogue in Arabic. You would not even know that he was an American actor. And he makes such a hateful villain that by the time it reaches its climax, where Chuck Norris just literally beats the living shit out of Abdul by like driving his motorcycle through a house through a window and punching him in the jaw and blowing him up with the rockets from the back of his motorcycle. You're feeling it's such a
Delta Force objection. Delta Force does not have motorcycles that shoot rockets. Okay, so
you know about.
As a former member,
the Delta Force wasn't called that. Well, that's the fact of the matter, is the Delta Force wasn't called up in this situation, and I think we can look at other hijacking movies, right? Something like Air Force One or Executive Decision, that don't raise our anger because they're not dishonoring the people who were actually involved in a true event. Obviously, Executive Decision, Air Force One aren't based on true stories. And you trying to say like, well, they didn't claim it was based on a true story. Give me a break. You're not fooling anyone in the audience. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew exactly what emotions they were trying to manipulate. And then to try to cash in on that with cheap catharsis, it falls flat, and it just absolutely did not work. And it's very offensive and paints the actual victims in a pretty poor light, just so Chuck Norris could stroke his considerable ego to come in and save the day.
Oh, come on, they changed it. The original plane was called TWA, and in the movie it's called ATW. They totally changed it. You would never be able to guess. But yes, you do make a valid point, because the real-life hijacking, you mentioned him earlier, there really was a victim named Robert Stetham, who was like a Navy diver who just happened to be on the flight, and he was beaten and tortured and then murdered, shot before his body was dumped out on the runway. And they definitely show this in the movie. This is the big point in the second half, where like they kill the guy. His name in this movie is Tom Hale. And after that, that's when they pretty much stop following like the real life story and pretty much become a fantasy, where they have the Delta Force go into Beirut and finally rescue these hostages and kill all the terrorists. And it leads up to a very subtle ending where they are on the plane ride home and they're literally drinking Budweisers and singing "America the Beautiful." Just to show you pretty much are expecting the Team America song "America, fuck yeah" to play in the background.
Robin.
I was so singing that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but see, everything Robin just said is a demerit for this movie. If they stuck to, I'm assuming everyone here's seen like Executive Decision, right? It's just such an over-the-top kind of hijacking story. If they did something that was a little more original, and then, because remember what Chuck Norris said in that interview? He said, I would have sent in the Delta Force immediately. His understanding of what the Delta Force is capable of is just like Americans, or, well, I don't want to say Americans, but, you know, the viewing public who watch CSI and assume that every crime can be solved with DNA testing, right? He clearly doesn't have a fully formed understanding of special operations and tactics if he thinks that driving into Beirut with a motorcycle with missiles is part of it. So when we're looking at the intentionality of this movie, this idea that America needs a more robust response to international terrorism, which I agree with, he is not doing his mission well by saying all you have to do is have some really jack guys in there with motorcycles that don't exist and guns that never run out of ammo. It just won't happen. So it's a betrayal of, again, the events that had happened, and it does not serve the intention he said he was going for in his interviews.
I do acknowledge that I think that the test of time has caused this movie to become more fascinating than it was back when it was released in 1986, because I don't think you can make this movie today. Like, we've seen stuff like United 93 and World Trade Center, where they don't just change the ending and have like a bunch of good guys come in and kill all the terrorists. But it's just become extra amusing, probably because the legend of Chuck Norris has grown, because we have like Chuck Norris facts, and Chuck Norris has since become like one of the internet's greatest meme. So it's almost like they're way ahead of themselves, saying like, what would happen if we took a real life terrorist situation and then added Chuck Norris to the mix to save the day? And it's done in the most over the top fashion possible, that it's become like my guilty pleasure, just because of how the second half doesn't care at all about any semblance of realism. Because we mentioned how he drives around on a motorcycle that fires rockets, and what I find particularly amusing is that they often fire rockets from the back. So it literally looks like Chuck Norris is farting rockets to kill the bad guys while he's doing it. So you watch any of those clips on YouTube, you'll see a lot of Chuck Norris facts, like Chuck Norris farts rockets to stop terrorism. So it's kind of like, back in 1986, if I saw this, I might have kind of been bothered by the whole uneven tone. But I think because of the test of time, the whole Chuck Norris legend, I just find this to be kind of a fascinating experiment, just the way that it starts off as kind of a realistic drama, but then becomes like an all-out action, wish fulfillment, revenge fantasy.
All right. Your Honor, I only have one last point. It's basically like 2 sentences, and then I'd be happy to rest.
No, I'd rather not hear it.
Give him 1.5, Your Honor. Give him 1.5.
Okay, all right. Chug thin ice.
Okay, so it's a small last point. Charlie Bronson is not in this movie. It's Lee Marvin. But there's another Charlie we should consider. Charles Beckwith, the founder of Delta Force. He was an advisor on the project and left it in disgust. So put yourself in the company of America's greatest hero and of Charles Beckwith by finding this movie guilty.
He's saying it's Charles Bronson.
Yeah, that's the joke. It's a good joke. I like it.
2 sentences there. Or?
Yeah, on that point, I will rest.
I heard that one. I'm happy I heard that one.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Warder. You may now present your first exhibit, or any remaining exhibits you have.
Well, I will just say that even though I would have loved to see Charles Bronson, I still think that Lee Marvin is great in this. And he is probably too old to be leading a Delta Force team, but he's such a badass that I think he adds a lot of gravitas to the movie. And sadly, it turned out to be his last film before he passed away just about a year after it came out. But yeah, I just think this is just a great piece of escapism where you just go in, you start watching like a very serious drama, and then it becomes very, very heavy, but then again becomes very entertaining in the second half. So it's one of those things where you go in there, it's better than you expect, but then you just kind of turn your brain off and be like be entertained for like the second half of the film. And I will say that it has one of the most catchiest and theme musics that you hear like over and over again. Dun, 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 dun,
Oh, God.
dun, 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 which they play over and over again.
They get their money's worth from that theme.
She's one word for it, yes.
Yeah.
It's got every drop of juice out of that orange.
It's done by Alan Silvestri, and I think he did this right after Back to the Future. It almost sounds like the Back to the Future theme with a few notes changed.
Oh man, I hear that now.
Oh, man. Well, if you get the motorcycle to 88 miles an hour, it shoots a rocket.
Yeah, there you go. That explains it. And one other piece of trivia, if you go to the Wikipedia page, it says that young Liam Neeson is in this as a Delta Force member, uncredited, but I have not seen this clarified by any official source. And I've seen this movie many times and have not seen Liam Neeson, so I don't know if that fact is accurate, but that would have only made the movie more amazing if he started off his career in this.
Hey, when did Excalibur come out? He was in that. I digress.
81.
Brian. Oh, okay. Well, so he wouldn't.
Yeah, he was already an established actor.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah.
It's like the Biggs Dark Lighter scene.
Mr. Warder, any further points before you rest? Anything else you want to touch on to bring this film?
Well, I will mention that I was always a fan of this growing up when I was a kid. It was kind of my guilty pleasure action film. But about 10 years ago, I wrote an article for crack.com because I used to write articles for them titled 6 Movies You Won't Believe Are Based on Unbelievable True Stories. And that was when I started doing research and finally found out about the TWA hijacking, and which I had no idea about. I had heard about it, but I didn't realize how closely it followed the real story. And we've touched upon some of those points. Like we have the whole subplot about the German flight attendant who tries to hide the passports and how the Navy diver gets killed. And there's also like a famous scene where the captain on this, Bo Svensson, he's giving a press conference inside the plane while the hijacker is holding a gun to his head, and then he fires off at the reporters. And this is actually based on another real incident, because if you go online, you can find the real captain, the real photograph of him holding the press conference with the gun held to his head. So just it adds another aura of fascination to this, that they were brazen enough to base this on like a real story only months after it originally happened. And once I researched all this for like crack.com, I became even more fascinated about the film, and I think even like it better now, even after learning this, than I did back when I first was introduced to it.
Brazen is the word for that, I would say, yes.
All right, Mr. Warder, any final points before you rest then? Or are you resting?
No, I think the defense rests.
All right. Both sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Mr. Schlender, you may begin.
Thank you, Your Honor. For my closing, I would like to read a bit about Robert Stedham, an excerpt written by his brother from a longer essay that he had written. It begins. Rob and his teammates were identified as United States military, and my brother, along with Clinton Suggs, was targeted and brutally beaten. Rob steadfastly refused to submit to the terrorist demands. His courage and willingness to absorb the rage of the hijackers and selfless protection of his teammates and fellow passengers would later be memorialized in the congressional record. In the record, they said, he offered his country as pure an example of courage as it could want. Rob was 23 years old. And that's the end of the quote. And I would just add, he was a hero. And we owe our heroes more than what the Delta Force is seeking to give, if it's seeking to give anything. Researching this case was emotional for me. I won't lie, I had tears in my eyes reading about the real events and the real heroes. So I am 100% fine resting my case on that point. So I do appreciate that Norris wanted to say something important. And I think there is room for movies like this with critical distance. Think of like Inglourious Bastards. That's not how Hitler actually died. But the Delta Force just missed the mark. From dishonoring real heroes to trying to create emotional whiplash with its conflicting tones, and lastly, the lack of Charles Bronson. The movie just does not succeed at any level. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warder. Please present your closing argument.
I do admit that this is a very uneven, flawed movie, but it is still a very entertaining one, and it's still a very fascinating one. And I definitely give credit because the Cannon Group, they gave a lot of like low-budget B-grade action movies during the 1980s, which did not have a lot of thought put into them. But at the very least, this one, they wanted to try something different. They tried something a bit more ambitious by basing it on a real hijacking and trying to look at all the conflicts going on in the Middle East with the Palestinians and the Israelis. And you can tell that the people who made this were passionate about the project, but they decided, well, we don't really have the nuance to like look at this in like a full-fledged light. And of course, we're basing this on a real story that did not have an ending. So why don't we give American audiences what they want and show how we wish a crisis like this could have ended? And that's when they brought in Chuck Norris and Lee Marvin. And whatever you can say, this movie is definitely not boring. It's pretty much even though it's pretty jarring in tone from beginning to end. It's always very entertaining. And you have to admit that they do such an effective job as building up the terrorists as such hateful villains that there is a level of satisfaction action seeing the Delta Force come in and kill them and rescue all the bad guys, and seeing Chuck Norris beat the crap out of Robert Forster and giving him the comeuppance he deserves. And at the end, when the Delta Force flies off and they play the same theme song over and over again, it's hard not to feel inspired by them and be entertained by this film.
You're right. I wanted to fly off too. Thank you all. Members of the jury, Mr. Maynard Bangs, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, and Mr. There is no chin behind Ryan Luis Rodriguez's beard. There is only another movie podcast. Ryan Luis Rodriguez. You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
Right this way. You know, my favorite Ryan Luis Rodriguez joke is that he doesn't do push-ups, but he pushes the earth down.
We both knew to make Ryan Luis Rodriguez Chuck Norris jokes instantly. It just came so naturally.
Okay, gentlemen. I would never watch a Chuck Norris movie on purpose, so I'm kind of mad that I had to sit through this film. I knew I was going to hate it early on in the credits when I noticed Alan Silvestri's name. And I'm like, something this chintzy sounding was scored by the same guy who did Back to the Future? This is fucking incredible. The score occasionally sounds like Hot Shots. Like, it's really bad. And then seeing Robert Forster in brownface made me so sad. I mean, completely overqualified supporting cast. George Kennedy, Martin Balsam, Robert Vaughn, Shelley Winters, Lee Marvin. Oh my God, this movie is fucking terrible, you guys. Nuance is in short supply. I will commend, however, that there's a sense that it's unclear if any of the passengers will be killed for the first hour, and that makes kind of an interesting tone. But then when it gets off the plane, Menachem Golan is a pretty incompetent action shooter. But at least there are explosions. Oh boy, I really love explosions. Therefore, I love this movie. Gentlemen's Four. Ben, what are you thinking?
I watched this and I actually did not know about that it was based on a real story. That made it so much more interesting. So I'm glad Schlender was the one that took it.
Now, how does Schlender's points, how do they color the way you think about the film?
They color it a lot. I mean, I did not care for it at first when I was watching it. I was like, okay, the clashing tones I definitely got. The first half I thought was interesting enough, although I hated how like they kind of portrayed the terrorists as being like sweaty and emotional, and all the Americans were like calm and collected and all that. And then it switched to that tone switch was just so jarring. I could not believe it. Coloring that in with the actual story, it does feel a little disrespectful to the actual heroes. I did not know that going in, and not knowing that, like, that's almost even more of a disservice to the real story. Because it does not play that way at all. And just to like do it as sort of an escapism, and was like, yeah, America's great, and Chuck Norris is American carnate, and we should always be kicking ass. You know, that's just not how it works. Man, that I have to think about it now. I did not expect that to be true, that first half.
Rob?
I think we can all agree if anything is getting this film up and out and not guilty, it's the first half of this movie. We have to reconcile. We can all admit that the second half is, in the very least, the most generic straight to VHS action movie shit there is. But the front half of this movie is outrageously good. Robert Forster's insanely good in this movie. I was so riveted by this film for the first hour. And it was really intense. And then I had to switch over my laundry. And so I kind of paused like right at the end of where the tone switch happened.
Did I turn on a different movie?
Came back about 45 minutes later, really ready to finish Delta Force. And suddenly Chuck Norris is riding around on a motorcycle shooting silly rockets. And I'm like, what? Bring Robert Forster's insane charisma and intensity back, please. Because I mean,
and like Chuck Norris, like this is an actual response, like just based on what Mr. Schlender said. I didn't hear a rebuttal to that, but like, yeah, the president's like, yeah, why didn't we just send in a commando who shoots rockets on motorcycles?
I mean, that's what we should have done. Exactly what they would have done anyhow. But to me, to Schlender's point of the real story, I have to take Robin's side there. This thing didn't say it was based on a true story. Obviously, it's inspired by true ones, right? But let's take a parallel, the movie Godzilla, the first Godzilla, right? There was a true historical precedent with that boat that received the radiation poisoning and all the people that got sick after the nuclear testing. The filmmakers took poetic license and blamed it on a radioactive dinosaur. Now, that's clearly not true, right? It was inspired by, and that's the kicking off point. That's where they then went and made their fantasy. Their revenge fantasy in Robin's case, which is why I think they took
back to Godzilla too.
I know, but that revenge fantasy, which to me is the point that Robin was making. That's why I think things that didn't happen in real life do happen in this, right?
That we wished happened.
Well, if she hid the passports the whole time, right? They never line anyone up. We never get the parallel to the Holocaust and all that. It's a powerful, dramatic moment that didn't actually happen in real life, right? Because she successfully hid the passports, or tried to for a while then. Now, I also don't think she was compliant. That woman was at gunpoint refusing to do what they said. They had guns right in her face, and she was flat out refusing it. So I do not see her as compliant. I do see her as trying to defend her passengers. But, I mean, they're just going to shoot her and take it. I mean, that's what they're going to do. So, she had really no choice. So the true stuff doesn't bother me. None of that bothers me because it didn't try to say it was true. It's not a documentary. It is literally, like Robin said, I think, a jumping off point. What happens if we dropped Chuck Norris with rockets into this situation? By the way, I don't understand Chuck Norris as an action hero with guns either. Like, he's a martial artist. Like, have him kicking and punching. That's what makes him dangerous, not shooting.
He rides the motorcycle.
I can shoot people and ride a motorcycle with rockets. I mean, I can't, but I could, and I'd be as dangerous as Chuck Norris is in this movie. What really makes him dangerous is his kicking and punching. Anyway, so I'll be the first to go on record. I think I know where you guys are going to go. But, man, the second half of this movie was so paint by numbers. But I can only really say that. It was just very paint by numbers. It was a lot of shooting, a lot of explosion. It's what I expect from a direct-to-VHS kind of action movie. That, to me, if it was just that, the whole movie, this would put it on the fence. While it's a weird tone shift, the first half of the movie is so intense and such a great piece of movie to me. It raises the kind of crappy straight to VHS movie up a little bit. It's almost all Robert Forster and his partner a bit. I mean, it is pretty much them saving this movie for me, and a bit of George Kennedy. So I'm gonna go not guilty.
Yeah, I can't go in on this. It's better than the second half. I will give it that, but I was not enjoying myself throughout. It didn't really matter about the tonal shift. It's two halves of a movie I don't like. I don't like either half.
You didn't even like the first half. Wow. Okay.
I thought it was occasionally intense, but it just felt ultimately. It felt misleading in a way that I felt very disrespected by. And even then, I knew it was based on a true story, but I don't really care about that stuff. So it did not affect me on that level, but I cannot go in on and say that it's a good first half. So I'm going to lock it in. This is a guilty for me. Ben, what are you thinking, buddy?
I respect Mr. Warder's cases. He brought some good ones with The Last House on the Left in 2010, which are both movies that should probably be considered differently. And I agree that this movie's not boring, but ultimately I think Schlender had him against the ropes on this one. It is cheap catharsis, as he put it, which was also the name of my band in high school.
Love it.
Unfortunately, with my apologies to the defending counsel, I will have to go guilty. So let's go tell that handsome judge.
That's my line.
Ryan, say it.
Let's go tell that very handsome judge.
Slower.
No, stop.
Let's
Slower and
go
sexier.
very handsome judge.
God.
Well, we're an ASMR show now, folks. Mr. Foreman, have you reached a sexy verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of the People versus the Delta Force, we find the defendant guilty of being a bad movie.
Hey, we're even more disrespectful than the movie was. I love it. The verdict is so rendered, I hereby order Chuck Norris to be roundhouse kicked until dead. Court adjourned.
No!
This is American Joe, interviewing the American way, outside the reels of justice. Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, it seems you won this case. What did you think of that verdict?
Well, I do agree with the verdict, and I really wanted to take the opportunity to highlight the real heroes of the actual TWA flight. Because, I mean, look, this is just a schlocky, corny Chuck Norris movie, like Maynard said in the jury, kind of paint by numbers. So it's inoffensive that way. So I just wanted to bring the real story to light, because I think there is room for movies like this with enough critical distance. So I just think Delta Force was maybe just a little too early, and I really tip my hat to Robin. He brought a very strong case, and he made a great arguments for it. So this really could have gone either way. And I'll see you later, American Joe.
Thank you very much. And here comes Mr. Robin Warder. Chuck Norris lost? How is that possible? Make this make sense to me, sir.
I don't know. I think the apocalypse was going to hit. Chuck Norris found guilty and he lost. I didn't think that was possible. But even though this film was found guilty, I still consider it a guilty pleasure because it's one of my nostalgia favorites. I watched it when I was a teenager back in the early 1990s, and back then just enjoyed it as a paint-by-numbers action film. But as time went on, I just found it more and more fascinating once I learned about the real story and how they made kind of this weird pastiche of like a real-life hostage drama and an escapist action film. And it only makes it more fascinating to watch, which is why I still watch this one every few years. And even though I lost the case, I was happy to introduce you guys to it because I'm presuming, did any of you had seen it before we did this episode?
Not at all. Nope.
I had not, no.
Okay, well, I'm glad I did because most of the Chuck Norris
It's funny that we're not, we're the types to watch Bronson movies, but we aren't the type to watch Norris movies. Because
I'm sure I'm sure when I suggested this, you were thinking, really? Robin suggesting a 1980s Chuck Norris film? But I wanted to suggest one that was a little different from the norm, and I'm glad you guys learned a bit about the backstory about this movie.
We don't put
thanks,
you in a
Robin.
box.
Thanks a bunch.
It was. Wait, you only had us watch it to learn?
This is American Joe signing off. Quiet, you.
Oh, sorry.
This is American Joe signing off. The American way. I'm going to go ride a motorcycle, this time with Uzis attached to it. See you later.
Don't sue us, Jim Henson. It's the American way.
Jim Henson can't sue us. He's dead.
His estate can.
Oh.
Is that a character in a Jim Henson movie?
No, it sounds a lot like Sam the Eagle. You don't think? It is the American way. No,
That's Yoda. What do you?
Yeah, that was Yoda.
No,
Do Sam? He's a little bit softer. You do yours.
I don't do a good Sam.
Okay, then thank you very much, Ryan.
I do a better one than you
we
do.
do not paint you into a corner or put you in a box. There's no movie you could suggest we do that would actually shock me.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, maybe next time. We'll see what I can find.
No, I don't think there's a movie where I go, that's out of character for Robin.
Oh.
That's what I'm saying. You did Last House on the Left. I mean, that took me by a shock. And after that, nothing.
Next I'll do something from Justin to Kelly or something like that.
No, Robin, no, don't even suggest it. No.
I'm hearing a yes from Ryan.
Yes.
No. God damn it. Oh.
But great.
Well, that or
great.
Batman v Superman, Ryan. Pick one.
Fuck that! No! Justin McGilly! Oh, no!
We don't watch explicitly good movies on this show. We've been doing it for 4 years. So, Robin, what have you been up to lately? What's been keeping you busy?
Well, I'm doing a lot of podcast festivals right now. A couple weeks ago, before we recorded this, I was actually in Austin, Texas to appear at the True Crime Podcast Festival. But one of the highlights of my trip is that I actually took a field trip out to the house where the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre was filmed. It's located in Kingsland, just outside of Austin, and it's been turned into a restaurant called Hooper's as a tribute to Tobe Hooper's. And the interior looks exactly like it did in the movie. You can see the staircase and the dining room. And I had bacon and eggs, and I really hope I didn't eat any human victims and stuff. But otherwise,
and I hope that I had bacon and eggs.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they have to do a thing where like someone's butchering something with a chainsaw or something, and I don't know if they could do that hygienically. But
I didn't hear any chainsaws while I was there, so I don't think they used them in the kitchen.
Oh, I'd be pretty mad if I didn't hear a single chainsaw there.
Not a single person is chasing me through these woods. Come on.
I mean, put some audio through the speakers. But no, that's pretty cool. Now, some people, this might be the first time they hear from you, so tell them a bit about your podcast.
Well, I host a true crime podcast called The Trail Went Cold. I've been doing it for 7.5 years now. I started in February of 2016, and I cover a different cold case and unsolved mystery each week. I've released around over 350 episodes, and I was a big fan of the TV show Unsolved Mysteries growing up, so a lot of the cases I cover are ones from the show that are still unsolved to this day. I'll just talk about the facts of the case and then give my theories and analysis. And of course, in a couple weeks after I record this, I'm actually going to CrimeCon in Orlando, which is another true crime convention for podcasting. I've been to a couple of them over the last several years. And of course, it's in Orlando. So ironically, the week after CrimeCon, I'm going to Disney World. So talk about a conflict there, going from CrimeCon to Disney World.
You just went to CrimeCon. Now where are you going?
I'm going to Disney World.
CrimeCon is great, but I'm not leaving my hotel room unlocked there.
Yeah, it's true.
But no, awesome. And you got, are you still doing the Path Went Chili?
Yes, that's kind of a spin-off podcast of the.
Yes, but the name is so cute.
It is, yes. It's kind of funny. I made a joke about that many years ago, saying that if someone ripped off The Trail Went Cold, they would call it The Path Went Chili. And then here we are, my two co-hosts, Jules and Ashley, we're trying to brainstorm like a new title for our spin-off show. And then we finally said, why don't we select The Path Went Chili? Why don't we use it before someone else steals it? So it's hard now.
I rip off myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to refer to it as like the Snyder cut of The Trail Went Cold, where we talk about a lot of the same cases from my podcast, but we go more in depth and have longer discussions about it.
Yeah, but it has that really weird 40-minute ending with the Joker. I don't get it, Robin. I don't get it. Now, we always ask for recommendations from our guests for movies that you think people should see. So what is a movie that people should see?
Well, I'm going to recommend two of them, and the main reason I'm doing that is the first one I haven't actually seen, but I think I should mention it. It's I had totally forgotten about this, and I've been meaning to watch it. I think it's on YouTube, but in 1988, they made a made-for-TV movie called The Taking of Flight 847, the Yuli Derrickson story, which is based on the real German flight attendant from the real TWA flight who hid all the passports, where she was such a heroic figure that they actually managed to make an entire movie about her, and I believe she is played by Lindsay Wagner. Like I said, I haven't got around to seeing it yet, but if you're upset that the Delta Force did not follow the facts of the real story, and you want to learn more about the real facts and the real people involved, it sounds like it would be an interesting film to watch.
Nice, cool. Schlenzo, are you going to check out that one now?
Yeah, I've researched a little bit, getting ready for the case, actually. So I saw a few clips.
A lot. I mean, how much more accurate?
Do
you have a motorcycle with rockets?
No, so it's not accurate in that respect, you know.
Because she did have a motorcycle with rockets? Robin, what else do you got for us?
I wanted to recommend another Chuck Norris action film from the 1980s.
Nice.
Yes. And this one is called Lone Wolf McQuade, and it's pretty much considered to be the inspiration for Walker, Texas Ranger, because he literally plays a real-life Texas Ranger in this one. And what's cool about it is that the villain in this is played by David Carradine. So the movie climaxes with a Chuck Norris, David Carradine martial arts fight, which is pretty cool. But the actual highlight is an amazing scene where Chuck Norris, Carradine's character, like beats him severely and tries to bury him alive inside his Dodge Charger truck. But they play all of this dramatic music, and Norris, he's on death's door while in the front seat of his truck, but then he finds a beer, drinks it, pours it over his head, and then uses his supercharger to literally drive the truck out of the ground and kill the bad guys.
It's his spinach.
Yeah, pretty much. Here's his spinach. And they play like ultra dramatic music while they're going on. Like, this isn't a parody scene. This is done 100% seriously. And it feels like a Chuck Norris Facts meme, except it's an actual scene in an actual movie made in 1983. So even if you don't watch the full movie, you have to look that scene up on YouTube because it's absolutely incredible.
Do you guys remember when Conan was doing the Walker Texas Ranger lever? He'd pull it and the random Walker Texas Ranger clip would play.
I remember that, yes. And
oh, God, that was funny. I don't think I've ever seen him crack up.
I think they've had the weirdest scenes. Like on Walker Texas Ranger, they would show a scene where a young Haley Joel Osment plays a kid who just suddenly out of the blue says, "Walker, I have AIDS."
It's the non sequitur that's funny, folks. But that's interesting. I've never actually seen a full episode of Walker Texas Ranger. I don't know if you have. As a pro wrestling fan, I've always caught the last 3 minutes of Walker Texas Ranger.
I never watched
on before Raw.
Yeah, I never watched it, but I do remember Chuck Norris's cameo at the 1994 Survivor Series where he protected The Undertaker from Yokozuna and guarded the casket. So that's a pretty...
Well, he protected The Undertaker from Jeff Jarrett and Bam Bam Bigelow and all the other baddies. So,
oh, yes, technically, yes.
Yes, very true. No, that is... I haven't thought about that exactly in a bit, but yeah, I also associate Chuck Norris with that.
Bigelow. You guys are just making up words.
I wish. R.I.P. Bam Bam Bigelow and R.I.P. Bray Wyatt. I don't care if it dates me, Schlenzo. I'm going to be sad all season.
Oh, fine. It's true. He will be, folks.
I really will be. I'm bummed. I've dug all my Bray Wyatt t-shirts out of storage, and they're in full rotation right now in all their glory. But yeah, do they even have Walker Texas Ranger in Canada?
They did. I'm pretty sure they did. I just never got around to watching it.
I'm against that, honestly. You shouldn't be able to.
For the whole hour.
I love that a Canadian came here and ended the greatest American.
Is there a Canadian version of Walker Texas Ranger? Because it's so popular. Like, did someone adapt that and this is a guy
Walker
from Ontario.
Canadian Ranger. He still wears all the denim, but never arrests anybody.
Yeah, he's so nice. Like he arrests with his words.
Hip flasks of maple syrup.
He's from Quebec, so he slips into French all the time.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Robin. This is rude. We're insulting your home, man. We apologize.
I think the closest we had a TV show called Due South, where the lead character was a Mountie. So I guess that's our version of Walker Texas Ranger.
I'm the Mountie!
Jesus,
right.
man.
Schlenzo, what's your recommendation?
All right, but you're going to have to make a poster for Due South now as well.
We'll see.
All right, so...
Crusoe is the Mountie, though.
I do like that. So after watching the Delta Force, I wanted something to soothe my jangled nerves, so I turned to the Austrian oak himself, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I am recommending The Running Man, which takes place in the not-too-distant past of 2017. It features Arnie as a framed cop that has to participate in a game that is, to be blunt, American Gladiators, only the stakes are life and death. It's hard to upstage Arnie, but none other than Richard Dickie Dawson does it with aplomb as the sleazy game show host Killian. This movie is easily one of Arnie's best. He gets to display his humor and physicality, and the plot is so simple you can just go with it, nary a care in the world. Keep an eye out for another governor. That's right, Jesse Ventura. The Running Man is a perfect blend of action, sci-fi, and fun, and we have just grown to love that combination from Arnie's oeuvre. And I want to take a minute, with a minor spoiler here, to point out how hilarious it is that in the movie they do an in memoriam dancing number in the middle of the show for all the stalkers Arnie has killed. And that scene is choreographed by who? That's right, Paula Abdul. And now you know the rest of the story. Streaming on Prime.
I believe
I think it's half the
Abdul was
battle.
also Arnie's stunt double in that film. I love the running. It's got some of the best one-liners of if you really want the stereotypical like Arnie action one-liners, like Running Man is definitely it.
Oh yeah, it's just pitch
You
perfect.
lift and throws him over the stairs. Every time he won't kill someone without quipping, and I love
Even
that.
Lift Bro, he really does that in the movie.
Yes, and more. Sub-Zero, not just plain Zero.
Zero. Oh, it's the worst.
He was only a pain in the neck.
Sub-Zero is played by professional wrestler Professor Tanaka.
Yep,
That's right. Actually,
that one.
Toru
That's
Tanaka.
true.
Yes, you're right. Fireball is also like some Swedish pro wrestler too, and Jesse Ventura. Of
No,
fucking course.
not Fireball. Fireball's Jim Brown. You're thinking of Dynamo. Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
So get some beer. We're gonna watch The Running Man tonight.
Dude, we should, man. Let's do it.
Our film today featured both an airplane and George Kennedy, notable for being the least drunk of all the Kennedys.
Oh, God.
Boo! I love it.
Yes, the Kennedys, a family notorious for their good luck with aircraft. So,
Jesus.
only appropriate, I recommend the film that earned him a nomination for a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor, Airport from 1970, which Robin mentioned earlier. The film follows the day-to-day trivialities of the single most exciting airline in the universe, which has to deal with weather delays, stowaway passengers, suicide bombers, and extramarital trysts, all before it's even time for lunch. Luckily, we got Dean Martin in the cockpit and the cool head of airline mechanic George Kennedy to see us through. Burt Lancaster, Jacqueline Bisset, the rest of the cast is a veritable who's who of 1970s Hollywood stars. But given it was released over 50 years ago, I imagine it'll have today's youth saying, wait, who's who?
Oh, jeez.
The film was immensely profitable, kicking off the 70s disaster genre, and inspiring 3 more sequels, 2 of which see George Kennedy reprise his role as mechanic Joe Petroni. Given that he isn't included in the cast of the 4th, I don't like his odds in the 3rd. Airport is currently streaming someplace or other, but you know what? I bet your library has a copy, so go rent it from them.
Oh.
I know, isn't that sweet? Rye Guy, what have you got?
My recommendation this week is a recent discovery that I now consider to be one of my very favorites. From 1999, it is a Japanese film from director Hirokazu Koreda, Afterlife. The plot is very simple. It's set in a very sparse afterlife. New denizens are posed with a very difficult task. They must pick one memory to pass into the next stage of existence, and one memory only. The film presents this dilemma not as overheated drama, but one of quiet contemplation. It presents the audience with the same crucial question, allowing for some active participation in the process. If you had to pick one memory, what would it be, and why? Now, obviously, there is no afterlife, so this is certainly a fantasy, but it's an intriguing one that more people need to experience. Afterlife is currently streaming on the Criterion Channel, one of only 2 services I will promote throughout the strike. Moving on.
Fantastic. That actually sounds really cool. I would watch that. Pretty contemplative.
So, like, do you get to see their memories as they're thinking about them, or you just watch them think?
No, you get to see it. Well, it depends on who the person is, but occasionally you get to see the formation of the memory, and it's a really interesting visual conceit.
Oh, okay. That does sound very interesting, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like it. Big Ben, why don't you send us on home?
I'm going to recommend another film about people being terrorized on a plane in the name of global terrorism, and that's 2005's Red Eye. Before winning Best Actor for his portrayal of J. Robert Oppenheimer, Cillian Murphy was killing it, this time opposite Rachel McAdams. One of the things I love most about this movie is how well these two play off of each other in this thriller directed by Wes Craven, still desperately trying to escape that horror genre. I actually remember the trailer to this film very vividly because it started out almost as if it were promising a romantic comedy with these two, who seem to be constantly bumping into each other by accident at the airport while trying to catch the same flight to Miami. Cillian being nothing but a charming gentleman, and McAdams being the successful businesswoman who's just too busy for love. And I almost wish they would have ended the trailer right there, released the film on April 1st, April Fool's Day, so that audiences would be tricked into a much better thriller as things turn ugly when it turns out Cillian is in league with a terrorist operation who has a hitman sitting outside of her father's window ready to pull the trigger unless McAdams makes the call to move a famous dignitary from one room to another in her hotel, making the assassination attempt much easier. The third act, it's not perfect. It's not, but still, I'm willing to sit and coach with these two fantastic actors for their portrayal of their characters as they try to outmaneuver each other, because the destination in this case is the journey.
Oh. So what was he, like part of the IRA or something? I mean, he's very Irish, so that would make sense.
The IRA, the Irish.
Well, you said he's a terrorist, right? And he's like a tasty Irish guy. I mean,
I think what Dylan said makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Okay.
No, Ben's the dumb one. You got it.
Oh, thank God.
No, I didn't see that one, but I guess maybe I didn't know it was Wes Craven, so it would probably. It sounds like it's musical chairs, right? I got to move the other guy around. So he gets killed then. Whatever.
I don't follow you. I'm not following you. I'm not. Talk about Bam Bam Bigelow more. That's more your.
Thank you for joining us so much. We are all on the show, and but we love having you, Robin, and we hope we're going to have you back again soon.
Oh, my pleasure. Yes, I love being on here, so you feel free to invite me back anytime. And I guess I'll conclude by humming the theme music. Dun, 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 dun.
That's great. Yeah, they've done some big wrestling shows up there in Canada recently. Did you run up to one of those?
Yeah, I went to the Elimination Chamber in Montreal to see Sami Zayn and Roman Reigns, and the crowd was just insane.
You told us before we were going to go, and we didn't even know Sami was going to be the main event, and then it was announced that he was, and it was like, oh, that's got to be such a great time for them.
It was, yeah. And he got I went to the SmackDown the night before, and he got like a 6-7 minute standing ovation nonstop.
Beautiful.
It was just so great to be a part of it. And in June, I actually went to AEW's Forbidden Door. To see AEW wrestlers face New Japan wrestlers, and it had a match with Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay, which is the best match I've ever seen live. It was just an epic.
And that one was in Canada, right?
It was in Toronto.
Yes, that was the one I was thinking of. It was Forbidden Door. I was like, oh, I bet Robin's here. That was the one I was thinking of. Cool, awesome. We'll have to go up there sometime and go to some Canadian wrestling. They're probably
see Japanese wrestling in Canada. I like.
Yeah,
I would do it. I would do it exactly. But Robin, we hope to have you back sometime soon, anytime you want. And we hope everyone else will join us as well as the Reels of Justice keep turning.
Count it.
Motorcycles with rockets.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.